Welcome to Apocalypse Apocrypha. I'm your host, JJ Sherdy, and this is the podcast where I discuss all things post-apocalyptic. Alright, episode 11. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. For Christmas, I received the Fallout 2D20 core rulebook and Winter of Atom campaign book, as well as a set of dice, so I'm pretty stoked about all that. So, a while back, a friend told me that I was talking about Fallout too much. So here's an entire episode dedicated to it. I wanted to do this right, so I did a bunch of research and wrote out a script. So while I'm sure this will allow me to stay uncharacteristically on point, I may sound a little stilted. So, sorry in advance. There's a lot of talk these days about Fallout, thanks to Season 2 of the show, and it's opened up a lot of old wounds in regards to which games you prefer, Classic or Bethesda. Fallout Tactics is only sometimes lumped in with Classic as a sort of spin-off, and nobody ever pays attention to Brotherhood of Steel. Fallout New Vegas gets lumped in with Classic because it's made by the original creators. Well, at least some of them. The success of this TV show has inflamed that old divide, but I'm reminded of that James Franco meme where he's standing there in a noose, looking at the man beside him and he says, "First time." I went through all of this with The Walking Dead, being turned into a TV show, and then becoming a cultural phenomenon. The Fallout show isn't following established canon, so, like with The Walking Dead and The Last of Us, I have to silo it off into some alternate reality version of Fallout. I haven't even actually seen it yet, but some of what I've seen does look good. Others look a bit meh. Primarily, though, it doesn't help that influencers are creating content from all the drama surrounding the series. On the other hand, I have had my fair share of critiquing where Bethesda has taken Fallout. I have several blog posts about the subject from a few years ago now. But on the other hand, I also hate seeing people just milk the critique to build up their social media score. But on the other hand, I can see that it does actually work. It's a viable tactic, and it gets results, sadly. So while I have stepped back from doing it myself, I am paying attention and learning what I can. Because again, this whole podcast is about learning what works. So, I may tread into some unfamiliar and less than savory waters with this. We'll see where I end up. Now, I have to open with the fact that I do think the original Fallout games were better RPGs. But I also appreciate the Bethesda games for what they are. Fallout 1 and 2 are deeply engrossing and well fleshed out post-apocalyptic worlds that you can explore multiple times, because they've got both great characters, settings, and stories. That's not really both, is it? Anyway, Tactics is a fun squad-based game with solid gameplay and a decent enough story. Brotherhood of Steel doesn't exist, just forget about it. Lots of people see Fallout New Vegas as the perfect synthesis of the two eras, due to the overlap in dev teams and tech, which I get. Fallout 3, 4, and 76 are just fun, post-apocalyptic worlds to run around in. They're visually fantastic. So, if you just ignore the lame story and just go do your own thing, you'll have a good time. Don't get me wrong, what Bethesda did with Fallout 76 broke me, and I've never pre-ordered the game since. But I don't hate it. As far as I've heard, they've really turned it around in the 6 or 7 years since it's been released. I guess my dual Uzi-wielding fence-sitter point is thus. I get why people like the classic Fallout games, and I get why people like the Bethesda games. They're different, but they've all got points going for them. Also, I get why people like the show. Some people are just hardcore Fallout fans and will eat up anything that's given to them. Others have their entire online social world built around being a fan of it. Whatever. I'll get around to watching it eventually. So, don't at me about that. So, with all that in mind, the point of this episode is not to be a critique of the series. I'm not interested in arguing which game is best. I'm just going to be focusing on what has worked from across the series for a lot of people. Part of that is focusing on what the classic games did well, and another part of that is focusing on what Bethesda stopped doing when they bought the IP. They took the IP to insane heights, and more people play it now than ever before. But to get it to that level, they've had to strip it of everything that made it popular in the first place. There's an old saying about appealing to no one when you're trying to appeal to everyone. Well, they seem to have found that sweet spot right before the drop-off. The reason for all of this episode in particular, is that, as I've stated in previous episodes, I've decided to start making my own Fallout-inspired TTRPG set in Australia. As also previously stated, I did some writing work on Broken Roads, a post-apocalyptic video game set in Australia that was said to be inspired, at least in part, by Fallout. Broken Roads is a game that exists, which turned out like it did. That's all I'll say. Combining that experience with the fact that every time I see people trying to make fan-made stuff for Fallout, any kind of role-playing game for Fallout that's set in Australia, it's always the same cliched sort of stuff. Giant spiders, the Enclave, super mutants, Deathclaws, and the Brotherhood of Steel. I saw that over and over, and I just decided to do it myself. But again, I'm a writer. Why write some fan fiction for someone else's IP when I can just go and make an entirely fresh setting that's inspired by Fallout? So, with that in mind, I decided to study what made Fallout what it was/is. And so I threw this episode together so that I could learn, and you, in turn again, can also learn from my questionably valid efforts. Will this work as a pen and paper game as opposed to a computer game? I don't know, but I'm not made of money, so I'm doing what I can. Anyway, this isn't an episode about my own project, but its primary source of inspiration. For those of you who are wondering about where the usual prepper stuff is, I've been reading a heap of novels for my master's degree, and I wanted to break from having to read books I wouldn't normally read. So I put together this episode and a little research project to keep things rolling and keep myself sane. I have started reading the next book though, and yeah, it's the usual fare. The vast majority of this is comprised of points that I've taken from a lot of different sources online, mostly YouTube video essays. There are some original points of my own that I've made in the past on my blog, but for the most part, these are points that others have made that I in turn agree with. So, check out the show notes for the links to all my sources. Yes, I have sources. A lot of them. I did a lot of research for this. So, I'll just start with Tim Kane's rundown of the pillars from Fallout 1. This is simply me regurgitating his points. Honestly, you should probably just go listen to him tell them directly, because they sort of set the stage for what I'm doing here. At any rate, if you haven't checked out his channel, you should. The dude is a fucking wizard with games and stories, and he made the original Fallout, so why wouldn't you? So we've got mega levels of violence, no right solution, there will always be multiple solutions, the player's actions will affect the world, and the world will react to the player, there should always be a sense of urgency, the game should be open-ended, you can go anywhere, do anything you want. Always have a goal though. You can get the water chip, destroy the mutant army, kill the master. Always have control over your actions. Never take agency away from the player. They wanted a good interface, and they wanted encounter windows, which is basically just the talking heads. There was a wide variety of weapons and armor, and actions you can take with them. Very detailed character creation rules. It was made for the public, but specifically it was made to make the GURPS fans happy, and the team was very motivated. So, basically for me, things I can take from this are mega levels of violence, that's easy enough to do. No right solution, that's definitely doable. There will always be multiple solutions. I mean, that's easy enough to work into a pen and paper game. The player's actions will affect the world, and the world will react to the player. Yeah, you always want to have a sense of influence in the world you're playing in. Well, I guess it depends on the type of game. You should feel like your actions are having an impact. Sense of urgency. Yeah, that's always a pretty good motivator. Open-ended. Yeah, definitely. These games should be open-ended. You should just be able to do what you want. If you don't want to save the world, don't save the world. That's your story. Never take agency away from the player. Yeah, so stories are very much like driven, but games are all about what the players are choosing to do, and you should maximize that. Wide variety of weapons and armor. I'll talk about that more later, but yes, there will be that. And very detailed character creation rules. Yes, I like that style of thing. Okay, so here we have some of the inspirations that have been listed in various sources for the original Fallout. For computer games, we've got XCOM, Crusader, Wasteland, and the Ultima series. For pen and paper, we've got GURPS, WizWar, Gamma World. For novels, we've got A Canticle for Leibowitz, I Am Legend, and On the Beach. As for movies, we've got The Road Warrior, A Boy and His Dog, The Day After, Forbidden Planet, City of Lost Children, La Cité, I don't speak French, and Flash Gordon. Inspiration is important. You see something you like and you want to make something like it, or something in the same vein without outright copying it. The trick, and I didn't come up with this myself, is to not just imitate the thing that inspired you, but to go back and explore the things that inspired it. As an example, my last book, The Land of Long Shadows, was partly inspired by Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but I didn't just stop there. I went and explored what inspired them, and I ended up in places like Berserk, Nausicaa, and H.P. Lovecraft. When you take that extra step back to the media that inspired you, you end up creating something that's more parallel to it, rather than entirely downstream of it. Okay, so we're going to start with the original Fallout. So, in regards to tone, Fallout was very mature in its themes. It was dark, brutal, and bleak. But it wasn't just the edgy surface level stuff. You could be good or evil. There were a lot of grey morality choices. And doing the right thing might not have been the best outcome in the long run. Most importantly, though, you had to live with the consequences. The wasteland was a harsh and cruel environment that didn't pull any punches. You were trekking across the decayed carcass of a retro-futuristic dystopia. There's a tragic sense of loss in Fallout, and it's made all the more poignant by the fact that what wastelanders think was lost was never real. They're lamenting a world that never existed. Contrast that against the live-action trailer for Fallout 76, where a woman smiles happily as she spins around in a summer dress blasting a pair of SMGs, and you can start to see why people feel like something might have been lost. But at the same time, the bleakness of Fallout was blended with dark humor, so there was an element of schlocky B-movie comedy. It just wasn't the whole meal. At the end of the day, at the end of the game, no matter what path you took, the ending was always grim. You either died in the wasteland, got dunked in a vat of goo and betrayed everyone you knew, or you saved them all and got exiled for it. So, even when you win, you'll lose. The original Fallout took place in California, in the deserts just north of Los Angeles. But the thing is that even though it still haunts them, the old world is well and truly dead. There's just ashes and echoes and those that remain in the ruins, trying to build some sort of life for themselves. The problem is that they've only got one framework to learn from, and they know where it leads. There's a few settlements scattered about the wasteland, but they're fragile and living on the edge, and your actions can see the end of any or all of them. Humanity is still in the process of pulling themselves out of the rubble. It's only been 84 years since the bombs dropped. They're not rebuilding, they're just surviving. But humans do what they do, even in the bleakest of times. They square their shoulders and march on through the nihilistic hellscape. Because that's what the world is now, a godless wasteland of bleak and brutal violence. For every one soul that tries to give it an honest go, there are 10 who take the easy route, the banal path of evil. Every settlement you encounter has armed guards, and none of them trust outsiders. Guards are always telling you to holster your weapons, and a lot of people refuse to even speak to you if you've got a weapon equipped. You see people digging in the dirt, trying to eke out a living from the land, and you don't know what's sadder, the so-called farmer that doesn't know about crop rotation, or the raider who's just trying to steal the mega crop. You're an outsider from an underground shelter, ejected out into this mess of a world to try and save your people, and you can't help but wonder if the world out there is even worth saving. You manage to barter, steal, and fight your way to what you need to save your vault, but along the way you discover an even greater threat, the forced evolutionary virus, FEV, is a curse from the old world that was unleashed by the Master. A horror monster, a mutant cyborg who wants to eradicate all of humanity's suffering by kidnapping them and forcibly mutating them into super mutants. He saw how divided humanity was, how it led to the Great War, and how they still fought amongst the ruins. And so he wanted to unify everyone under his horrific vision of peace. He found FEV in an old world military base, Mariposa, the same place where the Brotherhood of Steel trace their origins. In this way, the Brotherhood of Steel and the super mutants are intimately linked. They both originate from Mariposa. When the founders of the Brotherhood discovered what the government was doing with FEV, they went rogue and seceded from the United States just days before the Great War. But they never destroyed the FEV, and so it came back to haunt them. All the unfair and uncaring horrors of the wasteland are transpiring under the dead eyes of the old world's consumerist propaganda. The alternate America from before the Great War was a corporate hellscape, where people had traded their freedom for safety. The smiling faces on an endless sea of advertisements show a population hopeful in the power of nuclear energy. Naively so, in hindsight. The false promise that patriotic optimism would see them through the troubled times. It's that juxtaposition of seeing that misplaced faith of the past and the banal horrors of the present that really make Fallout what it is. The apocalypse didn't ruin a utopia, it just burned away the lies and revealed what was always there. Okay, now for a focus on the story. The story of Fallout is relatively simple, but there's a lot of wiggle room for how you go about completing it. Your vault's water chip broke, so you're sent out to find a replacement. As you explore the shattered and divided wasteland, you discover the threat that the Master and his super mutants pose to your vault. You actually complete your mission relatively early in the narrative, but you're sent back out into the wasteland to eradicate the Master and the source of the super mutants. Once you finish those two tasks, you return home to find a thankful overseer who is also exiling you. It's a pretty simple series of quests. Get this thing, kill this guy, blow up this place. But it's the choices you make along the way that really matter. If you send a caravan of water to your vault to buy yourself more time, you do get extra time on that first timer, but you lose time from the second timer, because your vault has more water to survive off of while you search for the water chip, but the Master has been tracking caravans, and so now he's able to find the vault that much quicker than he normally would. When you do find the water chip, you can take it and wipe out the community of ghouls that are relying on it, or you can fix their water pump, and so they'll just give it to you. And if you're not quick enough with the subsequent quest line, the ghouls all get wiped out by the super mutants. There's a small faction that can help you with attacking the Master, but they need help freeing the local town from a group of thugs. But for that, they need guns. But to get guns, you need to reach these gun merchants who can make a delivery. But for the delivery to go through, you need to wipe out these legendary wasteland monsters. After all that, the small faction can help you out with taking down the Master. Likewise, the Brotherhood of Steel can help you take down the Master's ability to make super mutants. But they want you to scout out their location first, because they're not just going to send out a squad of troops on a baseless claim. So you trek north, you see all the super mutants milling about the outside of the base, and then trek all the way back south to get a few soldiers to help with the frontal assault. Likewise, if you talk to a particular scribe in the Brotherhood, you can get an autopsy report that shows that super mutants are infertile, which you can give to the Master to get him to commit suicide. Or you can just detonate a nuke in his base, or you can just punch him in the face until he dies. There are lots of choices to be made in the narrative, and all these choices have consequences that play out down the line. The fantastic thing is, though, there's a lot of these grey choices where you have to make some sort of concession or sacrifice. Or you make a choice that seems like the right choice, but it leads to a more negative outcome. One of the biggest ones that most people think about when they think about Fallout is a conflict between a small-town sheriff and the local crime boss who runs a sleazy bar. You think helping the sheriff would lead to the best ending for the town, but this is Fallout. The sheriff is honest and hardworking, but he doesn't know how to run a town and make it thrive. The sleazy crime boss actually turns the town into a regional destination, and he makes himself rich, but everyone around him prospers as well, and then he chokes on food and dies anyway. Choices and consequences are key, but on the same page, not everything revolves around you, because you're not the center of the wasteland. Your choices and actions do have weight, but they're not the only weight on the scale. Okay, time for some design talk. As for generic design elements, there is an oldies song in the intro cinematic, but there's actually no in-game songs, just the haunting ambient tracks. Both ghouls and super mutants were actually these terrifying mutant creations that were clearly both human once. Ghouls are these rotten walking carcasses that were held together with nuts and bolts. Horrific beef jerky ghosts from before the Great War. Super mutants are massive and mostly imbecilic, with these straps that hold their massive upper lips in place, because the mutation process was never perfect. One of the biggest design elements of the first game was that it had a 1950s aesthetic, but it used it sparingly. It had a retro-futuristic atom punk vibe, but it wasn't trying to drown you in it at every opportunity. Basically, it's what people in 1997 thought the people in the 1950s thought the world would look like in 2161 if it had been destroyed in nuclear war in 2077. So basically all that means is that there are some elements of 1950s design, like Art Deco, that was superimposed on the future by the 1950s retrofuturism lens that the 1997 people were looking through. Oh my god, what a sentence. But it wasn't all apple pie and baseball and sundresses in 2077. And it sure as hell wasn't a tattered version of that in 2161, something the later games had trouble with understanding. It had mostly realistic weapons. There were still a few sci-fi energy weapons. There's not much to this point beyond the fact that it changed a lot in later games. By Fallout 4, you're shooting bizarro weapons that don't really adhere to anything at all. Though, there are benefits to that as well. One of the key features of Fallout is the sparseness of the wasteland. I'm sure this was due to time and budget constraints, but as I've said previously, those sorts of constraints force you to focus on the cream rather than throwing in all the trash as well. This sort of constraint wouldn't work well in a fantasy game, but it actually worked really well in Fallout, because there's only a few places where you can go, which is exactly what you'd expect in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's only a generation or two away from the apocalyptic event. Everywhere you go is interesting, memorable, and essential. Again, something the later games just did the reverse of. If I say Junktown, then every Fallout fan will know what I mean. But if I say Finch Farm, then not everyone will remember what that is, or even what game it's from. Okay, that's it for the original Fallout, and now we're going to move on to Fallout 2, starting with the tone. Fallout 2's tone is a zany, dark comedy version of Fallout 1. It's a cold and grim world with a twisted sense of humor. It explores dark themes with goofy jokes. The most succinct way I heard it described as is that Fallout 1 feels grimy, while Fallout 2 feels scummy. Fallout 2 is a lot more established, and so the filth you wade into feels more like a conscious choice at this point than in Fallout 1, where there was no choice at all. Overall, the setting of Fallout 2 takes itself a bit less seriously than Fallout 1. Some crazy things can happen out in the wasteland, and you could say that's just a change in tone, or just a natural extension of what was present in Fallout 1, but not allowed due to budgetary constraints. See what I said earlier about only being able to include the cream. Okay, time for the setting. Set in 2241, 80 years after the first game, people have diverged much more than in the first game. We've got some more advanced societies, showing that humanity is on the mend, but also a lot of tribal groups, showing that it's a patchwork progression at best. The map is bigger, and there's a lot more population centers. We've got Arroyo, Klamath, New Reno, Redding, Modoc, The Den, Vault City, Gecko, NCR, and San Francisco. I listed them all off because, again, there's a lot, but they've all got their own distinct flavor, and everyone remembers each and every one of them. Despite all that civilizational rebuilding, though, there's also more conflict, suggesting that conflict is a key part of civilization. Alongside this, there's the fact that we get hints of what's beyond the borders of the map. Group politics play a bigger role in Fallout 2, which is something you'd expect when you get large groups of people together. Vault City and Gecko are butting heads, Vault City and NCR are butting heads, Vault City and New Reno are butting heads. I'm making a joke, but everyone does butt heads with everyone else. It's not just Vault City, though they are their own particular brand of douchebag. Alongside this, the locations were made by different people, so it can come across as a bit swingy. Redding is the Wild West town, San Francisco is the Kung Fu town, and New Reno is the mobster town. Of particular note is the current state of the Brotherhood of Steel. While they were a powerhouse in Fallout 1, by the time Fallout 2 rolls around, they're basically a nothing faction. They've got a few little outposts here and there, but they're massively reduced in power and relevance now, which makes sense, because they were a nostalgic, isolationist faction, and while the rest of the wasteland wanted to move forward, they were only ever wanting to turn inward and look backward. Overall, Fallout 2 doesn't just feel like more of the same, but rather a natural progression of the setting. Time for the story. Fallout 2 has you being the descendant of your character from Fallout 1, who led a bunch of people from Vault 13 up north into the mountains to establish a tribe. They got a bit annoyed that you got exiled, and so they decided to leave of their own accord. The land is dying though, and so you're sent out to find the Garden of Eden creation kit, or a GEC, something created from before the war that allows people to revitalize the land. Again, you're just being sent out to find a MacGuffin. You set out into the big bad world that your ancestor conquered, meeting all the different factions along the way. New Reno is a nice little microcosm of the whole game, with 4 different families all vying for control of the town, just as all the towns in the region are vying for control. Eventually you do find the GEC, but by that point, you're wrapped up in events and your tribe has been kidnapped, along with the descendants of those who stayed in Vault 13. You track them down and find out that it was the remnants of the US shadow government, the Enclave. They're doing experiments on them, hoping to perfect a method of wiping out all mutants. You stop them, one way or another, kill the big bad, who will absolutely not let you talk him down, and then return home with your 2 united peoples. Unlike the first game, there's no gut punch when you save the day. You just save the day and everything ends nicely, which seems to set a new tone. Things are bleak, but good things do still happen. Okay, so that's Fallout 2. And now for a comment on Fallout Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel. I'm not going to touch Tactics or Brotherhood of Steel, because they aren't really included in the mainline events. And even after waiting years for another Fallout game, I took one look at Brotherhood and knew that it was trash. So, I'll just move on to Fallout 3. Okay, starting with Fallout 3's tone. Fallout 3 is this weird bastard stepchild, because visually it looks on key for Fallout, if it was set a decade or 2 after the Great War, which it's not. The destroyed landscape of DC is fantastic, with these eerie, skeletal vistas where the ruins of buildings stand like tombstones. There's also this quirky zaniness that permeates the characters and narrative. The best way I heard it described is that Fallout always had jokes, but Fallout 3 made the wasteland a joke. The perfect example of this is Moira, a character from this town called Megaton. You meet her early in the game. She gets you to help make a wasteland survival guide by stepping on landmines and getting irradiated, which is fun, but it doesn't exactly scream we're in a fight for survival here. Okay, setting. Fallout 3's setting seems to have shifted somewhat, because instead of just being in the ruins of a dead nation, now you're firmly in the ruins of a dead America, which I sort of get, since it's in DC, the capital, but the hard shift towards nationalism and Americana was very much in your face. Just in the first 2 games, it didn't matter that you were in the ruins of America, because America was long dead and gone. That's what made the Enclave such an absurd enemy at the end of Fallout 2. They wanted to genocide anyone with a genetic deviation, which is basically everyone, for a nation that had been dead for 164 years. Just imagine wanting to commit genocide for a nation that ended in 1862. I mean, the Confederate States of America ended in 1865, and I can totally see some people willing to commit genocide to bring that back, but my point still stands. It's absurd. The thing with Bethesda is that they took everything that made Fallout and shoved it into Fallout 3, even when it didn't make sense. So you've got the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast, but now they're more like knights in shining armor than techno-hoarding isolationists. And they knew what they were doing when they were doing this, because they wrote it into the narrative that there was a schism that formed the Outcasts, Brotherhood members who rejected the new path that the East Coast faction was taking. So Bethesda didn't just fuck up and get things wrong. They knew what they were doing and actively changed the faction. There's also super mutants, but they're a different variant from the West Coast super mutants, because they're the same, but different. The Brotherhood spent most of their time fighting super mutants, because that's just what the Brotherhood does at its core, apparently. There's also giant scorpions and deathclaws, which makes no sense for the East Coast. Really, the only mutants that should have reasonably been there should have been ghouls, because they'd be everywhere. Also, the Enclave is back, because America is bad, apparently? I don't know. So, with all that, you can start to see why a lot of people have issues with the way Fallout has been handled by Bethesda. There are a lot of good things about Fallout 3. Like I said, the setting itself is amazing, but everything else around it is a little warped. It is Fallout, but it's some sort of autofellatio Ouroboros version of Fallout. As for the story, you start out in a vault, but your dad has gone missing. You escape the vault, track your dad down, and save him from another vault, and then help him with his clean water project. You get kidnapped by the Enclave, you blow up their base, and then escape. Then you die from a massive radiation leak when you turn on the clean water device, even though several of your companions could survive that and just do it for you, but refuse to. They had to release a DLC to retcon this. Yeah, they had to release DLC to fix this ending, and you actually got to go on and keep fighting the Enclave on like one of their moving missile bases, and you finally destroy them once and for all, until they're back later on, I'm sure. Okay, time for Fallout 3 design. So, there were a lot of changes to design, but this is largely due to the fact that the previous games were isometric, and Fallout 3 is first or third person. Beyond that though, the Art Deco was accompanied by Gucci and brutalism. A lot of the weapons were taken from the 1950s, but they were still mostly realistic weapons at this point. It's not as bad as in Fallout 4, but the whole retrofuturism thing was already ramping up at this point. People wore the ruined tatters of clothes you'd expect to see in the 1950s, which again, doesn't make sense because the world ended in 2077, and the game is set in 2277, but that was just the design choice they went with. There was a lot more hand-holding in Fallout 3, with certain areas just outright railroading you and taking away all player agency, a sin considering what Fallout 1 was known for. One of the biggest elements, and one that's got its tentacles in all of the altered categories, is the music. The mostly 1950s beats played from your Pip-Boy as you run around the wasteland blowing shit up. It's no longer a desperate fight for survival as you fight back hordes of mutated humans. It's a zany romp out on the town as you pop heads to the golden oldies. Fallout 3 was okay. The story was bad, and there was little subtext beyond Bethesda's famous anti-capitalist slant on things. There was a lot of hand-holding, and that has generally dumbed it all down a lot. It was actually an alright experience when you just ignored all the story elements and wandered off into the wasteland to explore it on your own. Okay, time for Fallout New Vegas. This should be a fun one. Fallout New Vegas was written by a lot of the old creators of Fallout, and the difference in skill shows. I'm not one of those fanboys who loves it above all the others, but it's certainly more OG than anything Bethesda has made, and I do think it is a good game. Okay, starting with tone. There are jokes in this one, but they seem more toned down than Fallout 2. They give a nice contrast to the darker elements. In saying that though, it does still feel closer to Fallout 2 than Fallout 1. One of the interesting elements of New Vegas is that for all the politicking going on above the surface, every time you go down into a vault, you know that you're descending down into some unique little pocket dimension of hell. Some old world fuckery happened in each or every one of those vaults, and it becomes obvious that they weren't about keeping the inhabitants safe, but keeping the experiments contained. In saying that though, there is this sort of frontier tone to New Vegas, which is apt considering it's the joined frontier of two opposing empires, but it does bring this sort of Wild West vibe that I never really, vibed with. Okay, setting. Fallout New Vegas is, again, more of a continuation of Fallout 2's continuation of Fallout 1. The world is progressing, and this is most evident in how the Brotherhood is handled. You really get the feeling that the creators thought that the Brotherhood of Steel shouldn't even be around anymore, despite what Bethesda think, and they made it clear in their questline. As for the NCR, they're suffering the same bureaucratic bloat that saw the old world brought to ruin, and they're facing off against Caesar's Legion, a brutal faction with none of the old world's weaknesses, but none of their morality either. Both of these factions have got their own unique forms of currency, because it's 2281, 204 years since the world ended, and societies are finally up and running again. The NCR are using old world style currency, paper and coins, while the Legion are using gold Roman style coins. But there's still caps, because it's still a frontier region and old ways die hard. There's also Mr. House, this old world tech billionaire autocrat, who's caught in the middle and still trying to come out on top. Just imagine a more classy Elon Musk. He's basically that. Those are the three main factions in the region, but there are a lot of others as well. The presence of the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout New Vegas feels like a counter-argument to their presence in Fallout 3, like trying to make a correction to Bethesda's attempts to include their factions so prominently. They're no longer the technological powerhouse they were, and they've fallen even further than they had in Fallout 2. They're hiding in a bunker after terrible defeat by the NCR. They're isolationists, with an antagonistic relationship to advancement, and a follower you can recruit from their ranks even jokes about the rates of inbreeding. They've been an insular community since the Great War, 204 years ago at this point, and so everyone is pretty much related to everyone else, a few times over. It's a dire situation for the Brotherhood of the Mojave, and even their leadership understands how untenable their situation is. Like with the Brotherhood, the Enclave is present here as well, but it's not as the hyper-elite government organization that's trying to wipe out all mutants, but as surviving veterans from Navarro, the Enclave base that you wiped out in Fallout 2. They're literally called the Remnants, because they're meant to be what's left of that original force. They're all old, they've all done a lot of bad things in their past, and they've all moved on, unlike the Enclave from Fallout 3. Fallout New Vegas focuses much more on the modern world in relation to itself, rather than focusing on the horrors of the past. Those horrors are still there, but there's finally enough going on, with wide-reaching consequences, in the present, that they're starting to take a back seat to the drama unfolding. There's been advancement in the series before, but this really feels like the point where Fallout is heading into a post-apocalyptic territory. I'm not going to start fanboying on about Fallout New Vegas, but with just the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave, you can start to see how the different dev teams handle factions and their evolution in a setting's timeline. Okay, time for the story. So, in Fallout New Vegas, you're a courier who gets shot in the head and left for dead. And when you don't die, you set out on a quest for revenge. Along the way, as always, you get wrapped up in the conflict and politics of the various factions vying for control of the region. And your actions end up deciding what ultimately happens. Again, I'm not going to get lost in the depths of how detailed Fallout New Vegas is, but there's a lot going on with the narrative. A lot. If you haven't played it, you totally should. I think they just did some kind of cash grab re-release recently. It should be easy enough to find, but I'm also hearing rumors that there might be another remastered release sometime soon. So who knows? Pick whichever one you want, but you should definitely play it if you haven't. As for design, the design of Fallout New Vegas is where things fall flat for me. I did not care for the cowboy aesthetic. Popping heads as you're bopping to the sound of spurs that jingle jangle is one of the elements from Fallout 3 that we could have done without. It totally undermined the vibe that the original Fallout created. Someone said it best, the music is meant to be the ghost of the old world, not the soundtrack to the new world. Okay, time for Fallout 4. Now, straight away, don't get me wrong with this. I love Fallout 4 for what it is, but a lot of what it is not what I'm looking for my project. Mostly. Starting with tone, Fallout 4 is a big step away from what even Bethesda had established with Fallout 3. It's still a first-person 3D world, but the overall game became less gritty, dark, and bleak, and was instead bright and colorful, and it was kind of almost cartoony. Where the inferior graphics of Fallout 3 and New Vegas had people look less detailed, the cartoony nature of Fallout 4 had them looking less realistic. The whole idea of the game is very similar to New Vegas. There's multiple factions vying for control of the region, and you're an almost blank slate thrown into the mix. But there's also this undercurrent of distrust, paranoia, and suspicion that's woven through the world. But it's hidden behind these light-hearted Saturday morning cartoon characters. So, your mileage may vary. Okay, setting. The worlds that Bethesda make are fantastic. It's their strong suit. The problem here is that the world they're making isn't the world they need to be making. The big problem with Fallout 4 in terms of world building is all the ambient storytelling they included to pad out the locations. Skeletons lay scattered about the Commonwealth, their bleached bones a testament to who they were when the bombs dropped 210 years earlier. Yeah, just imagine that. Finding a skeleton of a man from 1816 that's just sitting in a chair with a broom handle inserted into his jaw, through his rib cage and down into his pelvis. And he's still holding a functional pistol that you can loot. That's Fallout 4. Bethesda has an issue with the worlds they create, because they want a lawless post-apocalyptic playground, but they're breaking the setting to accommodate it. This isn't anything new. Lots of people have commented on it. Even I had an article in Post-Apocalyptic Media pointing this out back on April 1st, 2017. That's 2 years after Fallout came out, so I doubt I was the first. They're so set on replicating the superficial elements of the original games, like the eternally omnipresent factions, that they've caused the world to stagnate and lose any sense of progression. The Commonwealth is super interesting to run around in, just as long as you don't look at anything too deeply. The Brotherhood are back as well, but they're even more different to the original Brotherhood than they were in Fallout 3. They have an airship now, and apparently numbers are no longer a concern. And they hate technology, so they're in the Commonwealth to destroy all synths. So we have a faction that historically collects technology and has issues with staffing their ranks, out to destroy technology that could be programmed to be 100% loyal and solve their numbers issues. How is this the Brotherhood of Steel? Do you see why people have a problem with this? On its own, it can be good, but when you take it into the larger context of the series, things don't really line up like they should. Okay, time for the story. Fallout 4's story is just the inverse of Fallout 3. You're a character running around looking for your son. Along the way, you get roped up into the wider events of the region and end up being the deciding factor as you pick which faction ends up ruling the roost. You do end up finding your son, but due to some cryogenics shenanigans, he's way older than you. The misdirect and reveal aren't really worth it, in my opinion, because literally nobody cared about the kid in the first place. The first time I played, I was just following quest markers because I wanted to finish the story. But when you find out your lost son is a terminally ill old man, there were just zero fucks to give. Ever since that first time, I've just gotten out of the vault and run off and done my own thing, completely forgetting the main plot line. And that's a pretty common occurrence. People just don't care about the kid. I have to admit though, it is kind of funny when you spend hundreds of hours on a character, there's some ungodly level, and they've explored the entire game map and all the DLC maps, and you finally rock up to Nick Valentine's detective agency, and you're forced to have this big emotional conversation about how desperate you are to find your kid. Because again, all the lines are voice acted, and it comes across as very weird. Okay, time for design choices. So as previously stated, the art design was changed drastically with this game, and everything has this cartoony vibe to it. Even the weapons have been changed to be entirely fictional and retro-futuristic looking. But it all became a bit too much. That was the only pot they were drinking from. Even at this point in time, people are still running around in clothes that people would wear in the 1950s. You even run into a character who you literally meet on the day the bombs drop, and then you meet him 2 centuries later as a ghoul, and he's still wearing the exact same outfit. Now, this is easily explained as Bethesda just wanting him to be easily recognized by the player. I'm not looking to take a swing at some low-hanging fruit there, but it's just another pebble in the proof that Bethesda isn't really concerned with, setting consistency. They have other priorities in mind. The shooting in this game is great. A massive step up from the jank that was Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. But again, if I had to choose between a good narrative and gunplay, I know which one I'm choosing. Especially from a Fallout game, which is a shame, because Fallout 4 is basically just a shooter with RPG elements attached. As I said earlier, all the dialogue is voice acted, which is also a shame because the dialogue trees all got dumbed down. Also, there's settlement building, which I do like, but you have to admit that it sort of goes against the vibe they were going for. You can't have raiders and mutants running around every square inch of the region, showcasing how bad things are, but then have dozens of settlements popping up all over the place, showcasing how humanity is rebuilding. The two game elements don't really, align in their messaging. Also, weird gripe, they made it so that all your companions were romanceable, regardless if you chose to play Nate or Nora, the husband or wife player characters, you can choose from at the start. So, not only are the most helpful people in the Commonwealth all canonically bi, you couldn't actually choose to be bi, straight, or gay at the start of the game, because you were always married to someone of the opposite sex. Now, this isn't even a woke gripe. I'm not asking for representation here, just consistency. Like, could they not figure out how to have the kid be adopted, like out to a gay couple or something? There's a single line in one of the faction narratives where they mention that you being the parent of the guy that all the synths are based off of is actually something that's useful to study. But that's it. It has no real impact on the game. So yeah, I don't know. They just want to buy NPC followers, but you couldn't be gay or bi as well. I don't know, it's just weird. Anyway, I'm rambling. My point is, Fallout 4 is fun. It's not deep, it's not a good RPG, but it is fun. Okay, time for Fallout 76. They released Fallout 76 with no NPCs, and they tried to lampshade it by saying they were all wiped out by a plague. They tried to pass it off as some lesson about how if only all the different factions could have worked together, they could have survived. But alas, war never changes, so everyone died alone. They took the core message of the original Fallout, that humanity is doomed to perpetually wipe itself out, and they used it as a shield to pull the kind of shit their anti-capitalist messaging is always railing against. A gigantic corporation released a half-finished, buggy game with no NPCs, because it was all just about being a cash cow to them. Again, I'm a little upset by the fact that I rushed through Red Dead Redemption 2 to play Fallout 76 on release. Do you have any idea how bad that feels in hindsight? Again, visually amazing setting, great gunplay, some interesting development with character advancement, but forcing people to play online all the time, loot boxes, it's not just that the entire narrative makes no sense. It's that it actually breaks the other game's narratives and damages the entire IP. It's set 25 years after the bombs drop, which creates such an amazing backdrop to set a story in, but they just fumble the ball so hard. Bethesda can't conceive of a Fallout game without the Brotherhood of Steel, Super Mutants, or Deathclaws. Apparently the Brotherhood from California in Fallout 1 recruited a local military unit in West Virginia via radio. Now, just imagine finding out that your government was doing human experiments using FEV on prisoners, and so you execute all the scientists and you secede from the USA. That's the OG Brotherhood of Steel. You're beyond the pale at that point. You have betrayed every oath and done things that there is no coming back from, and you've seen things that nobody would believe, and we're expected to believe that they'll just invite some old war buddies who didn't go through the same shit that they went through. We're expected to believe that they'll invite them into the club. And what about this West Virginia group, the ones who stayed loyal to the US, but are now getting a call from these traitors who want them to join up and become knights and paladins and scribes? Does this inclusion into Fallout 76 sound like it adds depth to the Fallout setting? Or like they were trying to shoehorn the Brotherhood of Steel into a time and place where they shouldn't belong? And there's also super mutants in Appalachia, because apparently they were doing human experiments on a small town right before the bombs dropped, which totally undercuts the original Brotherhood of Steel's origin story, as well as the original Super Mutants' origin story as well. But also, these super mutants are the same kind as in Fallout 3, whereby they get bigger as they get older. But in Fallout 3 and 4, it was acceptable, because you had behemoth super mutants that could be centuries old. But in Fallout 76, you've got behemoths that couldn't be older than 25 years. So why aren't DC and Boston overrun by behemoths in Fallout 3 and 4, respectively? Do you see where things are not lining up again? Also, cryptids are just the dumbest, laziest idea ever. So, in the real world, there's all these urban legends about supernatural monsters running around the region, and Bethesda's decided to just take those ideas and turn them into real mutants that you can fight in the game. Things like the Wendigo, the Jersey Devil, or the Mothman. But why would radiation and FEV make mutants that resemble real-world urban legends? It's lazy and it doesn't make sense in the setting. It's like if I end up having a drop bear in my setting because it's Australia. It would just be stupid. Why would koalas mutate into a form that resembles an old urban legend? Like dumb luck? Did some dick scientist make them for a laugh? How far do I have to twist and bend the setting itself to accommodate these weird additions? But the biomes look nice, and the gunplay is great, as always. Fallout 76 is fun. It's good, dumb fun that did more damage to the Fallout IP than even Brotherhood of Steel. Ugh. Okay, I haven't seen the show yet, so I'm just going to move on to the general comments. This is just going to be a collection of comments about the series as a whole, not any one game in particular. Fallout was originally a balance between post-nuclear horror, retro-futuristic nostalgia, and dark humor, but the aesthetics of the new Fallout have gone full 50s retrofuturism. There is this element of Lovecraftian horror that's hidden away in each of the modern Fallout games, but it's always this siloed off area, rather than an all-encompassing horror that should be the wasteland. The old games had you swimming in a radioactive sea of melancholic nostalgia. There were glimmers of hope, but the wasteland was always something to be feared and taken seriously. The new games have you romping through a post-apocalyptic themed amusement park, where there's no real threat against you. There was always humor in the original Fallout games, but it was a dark and nervous laughter at the never-ending cycle of self-destruction. The best way I saw the humor being addressed was that the original Fallouts were a Coen Brothers film, while the modern titles were more akin to a Naked Gun film. The thing with Fallout is that the Great War was a reset button for humanity. It brought to ruin all the greater civilizations of humanity and regressed us back to our basest and primal natures. Savage barbarism. But the thing is that humanity is still here, and still unchanged, and the issues that caused the Great War, the apocalyptic event that still looms over the wasteland like a fog, they're still present in the humanity of today. In the post-apocalyptic world, humanity is scraping by and building, stopping and starting. The modern Fallout games put a pause on things, because that's what Bethesda wants, the eternal post-apocalyptic sandbox to play around in. But the original Fallouts took more than one leaf from A Canticle for Leibowitz, because it wasn't just the Brotherhood of Steel that was inspired by the book, but the idea that it's all cyclical. And while the circumstances may change, the Great War will inevitably happen again. It's literally the tagline. War never changes. If Bethesda had just had faith in the setting and let it play out like it originally should have, humanity would have inevitably given them another post-apocalyptic playground to run around in. You could say this, this is what they've done with the show by nuking the NCR, but I think that has less to do with advancing the setting and more to do with dismantling the foundations of the original Fallout game. We've all seen the whole, let the past die clips from the recent Star Wars trilogy. We can tell when the inheritors of an IP are trying to cut out their legs from under themselves. The original games made it seem like there was an entire world out there, full of interesting factions and monsters, all struggling to survive in that broken world. You only got to see a slice of it, but there were hints at what else was out there. But Fallout 4 ended that. Now we know that there are Deathclaws, Super Mutants, Rad Scorpions, and the Brotherhood of Steel everywhere. They were all unique and special, once upon a time, but now they're everywhere, and they're all there is. Fallout is very much about the human condition, about being stuck in the consequences of the actions of others, but then finding yourself making the same mistakes. The inability to break the cycle of conflict, to move on, to not slaughter each other over differences of opinion, religion, ideology, or politics. So, a key part of Fallout is that the old world was such a fucked up place that it's still haunting the new world all these centuries later, and it's still trying to drag it back down. That's the world you stepped into, one that's been crushed by the weight of history. It was dark and gritty and full of unforgiving consequences. You did start out weak and a nobody, but you always rose to the challenge and made an impact on the wasteland. Okay, so that's basically my analysis overall of the series, and now we're just going to start focusing on what I'm going to take from the series as a whole. So, starting with what I'm just outright stealing from Fallout. Like all good artists, I'll be stealing what works, which is what this whole episode is about, So, here we are. So, my own setting will have various types of humanoid monsters, monstrous mutants, raiders, old world robots, power armor, and radiation from a nuclear apocalypse that all but wiped out humanity. Remnants of a seemingly great but deeply flawed old world. Obviously, I won't use the names or designs from Fallout. I'm not trying to get sued here. But you will see things and be like, oh, that's obviously inspired by that. This whole thing is a love letter to the original Fallout, so I need to get as close as I can without getting a restraining order, so to speak. Okay, so for what I'm not stealing, it's not going to have the same thematic core of the original Fallout games, the whole war never changes thing. That's very much Fallout's identity. Even when Bethesda changed it to, capitalism bad, They still kept the original tagline. It's that integral. So I won't be using either of those. Although it is still a setting where modern societies wipe themselves out due to nuclear war. So there will be some sort of underlying analysis of the human condition and the systems that lead to an apocalypse. I won't have vaults, at least not in the traditional sense. Wall/silo managed to pull them off pretty well by making them, different enough to Fallout's. But again, the idea is very firmly in the grasp of Fallout. And finally, I won't use the continental United States at all. But it goes without saying, when there's a global nuclear war, the US is involved. Okay, and the final section is what I want to model my stuff on. So this stuff is a bit more vague and conceptual, but it forms a solid framework for the setting to be built within. Open world. I'll start with Bethesda, since I feel like I spent a bit too much time dwelling on their alterations. I want their open world setup, since it's full of interesting locations and there's always a ton to do. In saying that though, I would like it to be the size of the OG Fallout maps, entire regions instead of just focusing on like one city in the surrounding area. Classic Fallout maps were big, but with only a few fully fleshed out locations. I don't think that's really going to fly with, a tabletop role-playing game. I think you need to have like the best of both worlds. A few fully detailed places that characters can interact with, and a lot of places that they can go out to and explore. Tone. I want the bleak horror of the original Fallouts over the goofy run-and-gun fun of more recent entries. I want characters struggling to survive in the atomic shadow of a civilization whose blasted ruins still tower over whatever paltry efforts can be brought to bear. I like that sentence. There has to be moments of hope, though, because people are always struggling on, but they're rare and hard-won. Most importantly, it has to be dark. Not as dark as my last book, The Land of Long Shadows, but pretty close. Humor. I do want there to be humor in it, but it has to be like a surreal, self-depreciating, black or gallows type of humor. It's not meant to be straight up silly or belly-achingly hilarious. It's that old guy who's seen some shit and laughs at all the wrong things, or the kid who laughs nervously because they don't know what else to do. I want that sort of humor. B-movie schlock. The science of Fallout is not sound. Do not follow it. It's based on a lot of outdated assumptions that actually give you a lot of wiggle room in the narrative. In real life, you don't see motes of radiation wafting through the air, and it doesn't cause cool mutations. It just kills you. Having the science be a bit less grounded allows you to include elements that would break a more realistic setting. In saying all that, though, I want consistent mutations, not just the anything goes you see in a lot of gonzo post-apocalyptic role-playing games, where mutations are basically like, you have a third arm, frog eyes, and a mouth on your stomach. All that seems a bit too zany and ungrounded for what I'm striving for. Consequences. Fuck hand-holding. If I do something stupid, I want to pay for it. On the other hand, if I do something really awesome, then I want everyone else to pay for it. I like the consequences your choices had in the OG Fallout games, even the bad ones. There was a weight to everything you did, and it forced you to take the world seriously. The Wasteland. I want the Wasteland to be a terrifying place. You remember those old stories about, the good old days, where Dad left the kids at home when he went into town, but he just never came back? And he wasn't going out for cigarettes this time either. I want that times 1,000. I want raiders, mutants, robots, wild animals, radiation, old world mines, and sentry turrets. It's not going to be something you run out into for some fun. It's going to be a harrowing journey that you might not make it back from. The old world. I want the old world to haunt the new world, despite being well and truly dead and gone. So you won't see the old world, but you'll see the consequences of it. Obviously, one of the main differences for me is that I'll be setting my game in Australia, but I'm hoping to find some middle ground out of how the classic and the modern Fallout games handle the old world. I don't want it to be all in your face, like Bethesda's Fallout, but I'm okay if it's like a little bit there, as a bit of backstory to the setting. Time frame. Like Fallout, at least the first iteration of the game, it'll be set in close proximity to the apocalypse that wiped out the world. Not close enough that it's a living memory, but not so far removed that humanity will have begun to rebuild to the point where the apocalypse is no longer relevant. I want it to be firmly in the post-apocalyptic Goldilocks zone. Not too apocalyptic, but not too post-apocalyptic. It's just right. An alternate timeline. Like Fallout, the game will be set in an alternate timeline where things diverged from our own. It's not just our world, but an apocalypse happened or will happen. It's a version of our world where things have gone a little different for a long while. There will be a lot of familiar countries, historical events, and locations, but they'll all be slightly off to some degree. Time. The game, especially combat, will have to be turn-based. Not out of any sense of loyalty to the original Fallout in this instance, but because it's a limitation of the TTRPG format. You can't have everyone just running and gunning in real time. Pen and paper can't handle that sort of play. So, turn-based combat, with a few tweaks here and there to make it, less of a computer game and more table-friendly. Characters. This one I'm taking from Fallout Tactics. Most TTRPGs are played in groups, and so you've got multiple player-controlled characters running around and interacting with the world. Fallout Tactics is the only title to do it this way, being a squad-based shooter. You can play a lot of TTRPGs solo these days, but I'd like to have the options to do it both ways, in a group or solo. There's a few mechanics that would have to change, mainly to do, with enemy encounters and whatnot, but it should be easy enough to figure out. Scarcity. A limitation of the original Fallout that actually added to the setting was the fact that it didn't have endless funds to pump into the project. Not only did this mean fewer towns in game, which inadvertently put forward that there were just not that many people anymore, but it also meant that they had to pick and choose which items to include. There isn't an endless arsenal of weaponry or items to wield, which creates a sense of scarcity. This is something I'd like to maintain, because the opposite is true as well. If you're drowning in supplies and high-tech weaponry and armor, then it starts feeling like it's not that much of a barren wasteland. Factions. I want to have factions that are actually based on some core idea or principle that's tied into the narrative, setting, and other factions, so that they all build off of one another. The Brotherhood of Steel and Super Mutants, they're my go-to example for this. They're not just random enemies. They've both got their origins in the same horrible place. These factions have to be unique, memorable, and coherent. You should be able to see their actions and understand, their justifications for them, even if you don't agree with them. Iceberg Theory. Now, this is something that the OG Fallouts and most successful IPs have, that Bethesda Fallouts don't have. A world that is structurally sound beneath the surface and functions logically, though you can only see the little bit that's above the water. You don't always see the whys, you're just faced with the whats and forced to figure it out by yourself. And you are able to figure it out if you have the information, because it's all planned out to actually function properly. It's a lot more work than just hand-waving something away, but it creates a much more well-rounded and believable setting. Contrast and juxtaposition. God, I hate that word. The old world has to be so alien that it's like another world entirely from the current one. Fallout pulled this off relatively well, with stuff like smiling adverts for children's cereal looking down on the ghoul who's finally turned feral and attacked her friends. It's an advert for a shiny chrome car playing on a TV without power in the blasted ruins of a dead cityscape. And then, when you go and actually look into the old world, you start seeing the cracks and things aren't adding up. Endings and beginnings. Everything has a time and a place, including characters and factions. You'll only ruin them if you try to preserve them in stasis past their natural endpoint, or find a way to include them before their natural start point. Gears of War had this issue as well. They tried to include the chainsaw bayonet in a prequel game when it hadn't even been invented yet, because someone must have worried that, what is a Gears of War game without the chainsaw bayonet? But they broke the setting to get it in. Bethesda has done this with Fallout constantly. So I get it's financially tempting to twist things so you get a little more juice out of that dead horse, but it's not worth it. Things end so other things can begin, and that's where you find your narrative progression. Classic Fallouts knew this, and that's something I want to try and emulate. Retrofuturism. I left it for last. I dig the vibe of some lost vision of the future from some aborted timeline that we narrowly avoided. Think of Fallout's year 2077. Do you think our own world will look like that? Probably not. Building a setting with these design choices in mind from the get-go adds a lot of character and assumptions to a setting. If I tell you to imagine your house, but make it cyberpunk or steampunk, you'll get vastly different images in your mind. That's what I'm hoping for with this. I've already got a few aesthetics lined up, and I'm just trying to figure out how to mesh them all together. Okay, and so that's basically it. I guess I'm done. As I said, I've already started working on this setting, and it's coming along nicely. I'm not going to go into what I'm actually doing with the project, not for secrecy or anything like that, but because this episode is already, pretty long, and it's more about what I'm drawing from Fallout than what I'm doing with it. That'll be another episode down the line. A lot of elements are lining up in that sort of, awesome serendipitous type of fashion. I'm making no promises about anything relating to this project when it'll be released, but it has caught my interest, and so work has progressed very quickly. If you have any thoughts or questions about the project, or my MacGyvered analysis of Fallout, drop it down below. Remember, I got a lot of this from various video essays on YouTube, and I'm going to post the links to all of them in the show notes. So go check them out. A lot of people put in a lot of effort because people are very, very passionate about Fallout, and there's always something interesting to learn. As always, we've come to the point where I'm meant to ask you to like, share, and subscribe. It's all good for the algorithm. So, until next time, have a good one and take it easy.